as an instructor in VR design at Lethbridge College in Lethbridge, Alberta, and as the chapter president of the VR AR Association, Mike McCready is doing his best to make VR and AR into tools to fix real-world problems. I'm Felix on Future Imminent, here today to talk with him about what he's up to. So, Mike, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing okay considering, all things, but I'm doing all right. How about you?
Oh, I'm well. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I wanted to jump straight in and ask about VR in education. Mike worked at the Alberta Distance Learning Center, an organization whose goal is to deliver various courses without needing the students or the teachers to be in the same room. They've been ahead of the curve on online instruction as well, creating an online school in 1996. If you had the technology you had today, you're back at the Alberta Distance Learning Center, but your future self comes to you and says, here's this great VR, AR technology that I've been working on for the last decade. I'd like to see what you could do with it back in 2008.
One of the things that I would tell my past 2008 self is really the opportunity that the technology allows and affords learners to be able to really become immersed in the content. Because I remember back in 2008 when we had at the Alberta Distance Learning Center, we focused primarily on high school and middle school, so science classes, math classes, those kind of things for high school students. And really at that point, it was a lot of text content, maybe some flash animations, but really kind of flat content, and how the VR technology could have really allowed someone who maybe is learning about mitosis or molecules, how they could actually visualize, a molecule in VR and be able to manipulate and really work with that kind of concept, and how that could really have helped those students in 2008 to really better understand some of these more abstract concepts.
It's that visual learning aspect. I
For
mean,
sure.
right.
One of the things that with VR technology, why it's so powerful with education and training is that we're very spatially minded people. Whenever you've seen a friend or you've seen on movies where someone's talking about how big a fish they caught, they use their hands to really outline the length of the fish. And that's because we really think in spatial terminology. And so when you're trying to teach concepts, whether it's math or physics or science or history, if we allow them to be able to learn in that spatial 3D space, it really solidifies and sticks better than probably any other medium, whether it's text, video, etc.
That actually relates to my next question, because in January, I saw that you created a VR program to help teach kids with dyslexia better reading skills.
That's right.
That's really cool. Has anyone thanked you for doing that? Because that's super awesome.
We've definitely had some of the public reach out to us, to give thanks. And some of the colleagues where I work have asked if some of their children who have dyslexia would be able to try it out. And, it was something that a team of mine and I created at the MIT Reality Hack. So it's really a prototype right now, but it's really meant to help students with word recognition and letter formation skills in VR.
It's still ongoing, right?
Yes, definitely. And prototype that we built, a functioning prototype, and we've had some interest from some organizations to help us find some funding so that we can take that to the next level, because it is a tool that I think has a lot of potential and really plays to the strengths of the technology and really addresses some of the needs that children with dyslexia and dysgraphia may have.
Have you learned anything from making the software that will help you in future VR programs?
For sure. One of the biggest things that we learned is, so like I say, we worked on it with a team of 5 people. And so really the team dynamics and how to work together was something that we really learned well, because when you're all working on a project together, there's a lot of people working on different aspects of the project, but then how you bring that together is something that when you're working on a team project is, particularly with coding and development, can be a challenge. So that was one of the biggest things that I got from it. The other thing that I learned from that experience and from that project was really the importance of really planning out a project. So we spent on that project with that hackathon probably about half a day with the team, just planning out and fleshing out what we wanted to do. And that really provided a foundation for us to be able to go forward for the rest of the weekend and developing that application.
So you have a plan now for how you would develop VR programs going forward.
Yeah, that's right.
Is VR your favorite subject to teach?
Well, right now, that's all that I teach. So I'm an instructor at Lethbridge College. And before we launched the VR AR program, where we actually teach students to make these applications, I also taught in the multimedia production program. But right now, I'm exclusively focused on virtual and augmented reality. And it is my favorite topic for sure right now.
Awesome. Price points have been coming down for VR and AR. It's a lot cheaper than even it was 5 years ago. When do you think it will be cheap enough for most people to have access to it, like most people have access to just a PC or a laptop?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And I think it's partly about cost, but it's also partly about form factor, which I think is another stumbling block. For example, I mean, the headsets have definitely become more comfortable over the last couple of years. They've got some technology that allows proper weight distribution of the headset, but I think the form factor is still an issue. For example, a few weeks ago, I was in a conference that our students were putting on called Merging Realities, and I was in VR for 3 hours with a few breaks here and there. And it was really straining on my head as well as my eyes. So, well, price is definitely one part. I think there's also an important kind of focus on making it comfortable because people, they're not going to spend hours and hours in VR where they may spend hours and hours on their phone or in front of a computer. So comfort is probably the biggest stumbling block right now, because if you look at the cost of, let's say, an Oculus Rift S or an Oculus Quest, you're looking at about $550, where, people look at buying phones or computers and they spend 2 or 3 times that. So the cost, I think, is pretty good at an affordable price point, but I think it's still that comfort form factor, which is an issue.
Most people wouldn't be using it for work right now, although there's a bunch of potential places where it could be used, correct?
Yeah, for sure. I think right now, although the recent pandemic with COVID-19 has definitely opened up a lot of organizations' eyes to the potential of enterprise use, I think primarily the biggest kind of revenue generation has definitely been in gaming and entertainment, but we may see some shift with more of an enterprise focus because of what's happening in the world.
What is the next big ripple in VR and in AR? Do you think COVID-19 has pushed that big ripple into being the growth in the enterprise market?
I think if I knew what kind of was coming down the pipe, I would definitely be richer. It's hard to tell kind of where the future is going, but ultimately, I think, and this might be still a few years out, I think we're going to see a convergence of VR headsets and AR headsets. So more like an all-in-one solution where you could use the headset to augment the world around you, or you could use it to transport yourself into a virtual world. And I think along with that convergence, we'll see again, that shrinking of the headset technology is still quite large, like the Rift S and the Quest. And the Rift S primarily because, I guess all of them primarily because a lot the lenses that are happening and the sensors that are occurring. So as that technology improves, we'll see those headset form factors shrink. As far as COVID-19 really kind of pushing the enterprise focus, I think it's definitely raised a lot of eyebrows and increased a lot of interest into the possibility. For example, we see a lot of events around the world being canceled or postponed, but there are a few organizations that are taking the opportunity to leverage virtual reality technology. So, for example, HTC, who are the makers of the HTC Vive, as well as other devices, they have an HTC developer conference that happened just a few weeks ago, actually. And normally it's a face-to-face conference where people gather from around the world. Because of what's happening, they switched it to a completely virtual reality platform, and we're able to, have speakers and presenters in virtuality with the attendees. So whether COVID-19 completely pushes the enterprise bubble, I'm not sure, but it's definitely increased a lot of awareness and opened up a lot of people's eyes to the potential for collaborative work in the virtual space.
You talked earlier about the importance of teamwork, and maybe there will be a convergence not only of VR and AR, but a convergence of teamwork and VR in terms of virtual conference meetings.
You're right. And you look at platforms like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or other Skype, other video conference tools that are currently kind of the go-to system. There's a lot of benefit to those, but there's a lot of disadvantages to those as well. And I think we may see even a convergence of that technology. So, for example, there's a company, I think they're called Spaces. You may want to confirm that, but where they've developed a tool. Let's say we've got 5 people on a Zoom call that are all just using web cameras and microphones. you could have one person or you could have any number of people in virtual reality. So they'd be in a VR headset and they'd be able to look around and see all the kind of screens from all the Zoom participants, like their web cameras, but they'd be able to bring in VR content or draw on a whiteboard. We're already starting to see this convergence of existing technology like video conference tools merging together with this new technology like virtual reality.
How is funding for this kind of stuff? Is it mostly just grants so far, or any like third-party investors coming in?
There's two parts, right? So you look at a lot of the startups that are around the world, they are relying primarily on investment funding, but it's still quite a challenge in the US as well as in Canada to find that investment funding. It's not until you see companies that really have a very strong product. And when you're looking at these startups getting funded, they're not funding a VR company per se or an AR company. They're funding the product that that company is producing. It is kind of in that seed funding that you're looking at. There is another side, post-secondary, a college and university world. A lot of the work that we're looking at doing and partnering with industry does come from provincial and federal, or I guess, in the United States, government grants. So we've got a couple of projects that we're working on. One that we've just secured with a technology company, a VR AR company in Calgary, Alberta, which is about 2 hours away from us, a $250,000 grant to develop a VR training platform to help caregivers better work with patients with dementia. And that grant was a government-funded grant.
Shareholders, as we all know, are so notorious for wanting those gains, and they want to see real world gains, which is kind of funny because most of your gains are in the virtual world. How do you explain that to them, or have you had any trouble there?
I'm in the college and university market. I haven't had a lot of exposure to shareholders and investors per se, but I can understand where they're coming from wanting, obviously they're investing money, they want to see gains. And the challenge that we see with that world is a lot of these startups, they're creating a product or a platform or a solution, whether it's virtual or augmented reality, and it solves a real world problem. But we're kind of facing, these startups are kind of facing a bit of a battle in that they've got these expectations if they get this investment funding, but also there's a lot of challenge in that the public hasn't fully grasped or understands or buys in to that technology. So I think one of the things that startups and everybody in the VR AR space needs to really try to focus on is really educating the community on the gains and the possibilities of this technology. So for example, going back to that grant project I talked about that we're working on for caregivers, when we did our grant application, we're looking at that this product will have X number of dollars of savings to healthcare providers because they're not having to go off-site to do training. They're not having to pay facilitators or enroll in workshops. So there's a cost savings of staff time. There's a cost savings of facilitator and workshop time. And I think that's one of the things, whatever the product is, there definitely needs to be a way to tie it back to cost savings or revenue generation, whatever the case may be.
How much thought have you given to privacy concerns in regards to VR? I mean, if you're having people sharing VR spaces, then how do you ensure that their personal data isn't being lost? How do you secure what's being said in those meetings?
That's a really valid point, and I think one that the privacy, and it goes quite deep, the potential, right? So as you get devices that are able to have eye tracking, for example. So right now, the way kind of VR works is they can only really tell where your head is moving around as you track your head rotation, but other devices are coming out where they actually can track where your eyes are looking, right? Any data that is created within that space is potentially personal data that could be used to improve the experience, but also could be used to exploit. It's twofold. One, if you're looking at using existing platforms that are out there, you're at the mercy of how they handle their privacy, right? How they handle the collection and use of that personal data, whether it's everything from your email address down to, like I say, what you're looking at in that space. If you're looking at developing that content, and that's something that we're going to have to definitely look at, again, like with that example of that caregiver project, is how do we protect that information? And with the platform for caregivers that we're looking at, obviously with any training platform, you're going to need to be able to analyze and look at the performance of individuals within that space. Are they going to the right place? Are they doing the right things? Are they looking at the right things? But what we'll need to make sure that we look at doing is, where possible, anonymizing the data so that we can get kind of those trends and those patterns without actually having it directly tied to individuals. Where the case may be coming in where an individual needs to actually demonstrate to their supervisor that they successfully completed the training, obviously that will have to be connected to their profile. But when you're looking at reporting performance trends of your employees, looking at trying to anonymize the data, a lot of things have not been addressed in the privacy sector when it comes to VR and AR. This space has been kind of compared to the wild, wild west, and partly because a lot of people are figuring out what works best, partly also because a lot of those best practices have been developed yet.
I like that word, anonymize. It's a nice sounding word. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've come to the end of our list of questions. Is there anything else you would like to tell our listeners? And it could be literally anything. It could even be what you had for breakfast. I don't care.
Virtual reality typically has been viewed as a gaming platform and really just meant for hobby or entertainment or to pass the time. But really the potential of this technology, of this medium for not just enterprise, but for the ability to connect people from around the world is quite amazing. And I know facing social isolation, social distancing, being in our homes, it can be a way to allow you to feel connected, even more so than a video conference will. Like, if we're chatting with a friend through FaceTime or Skype or whatnot, that's one thing. But if you can actually be, and I'm using air quotes, which you can't see, in the same space, in the same virtual space together, it has a lot of potential to help you feel even more connected. So I just encourage all your listeners to take a look at the technology as being more than just gaming, that it has a lot of potential for our society and for enterprise.
There is the potential that one day I could see those air quotes. And
yeah, if we were in VR, you could see those air quotes.
And it would be almost as good quality as a television interview. I would love to do something like that. I'll definitely be looking out to VR technology and to see when I can take this podcast to the virtual realm.
If you want, we could chat offline about that, but there are already some people who are doing some interview style experiences in VR, and I definitely could chat with you about that and get you set up if you want to look at that.
I would definitely love to talk about that. But for now, that was Mike McCready, everybody. Thanks for coming on to Future Imminent.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. I don't do this alone, and I sure wouldn't want to. As the host of Future Imminent, it is my pleasure to thank Nick Gertzen for producing, Quinn Cummins-Loon, and several others for their assistance in making this possible, and members of the Futurist Foundation for providing us with the music for Future Imminent.